forget the public opinion hotline number coming up on Friday for the Court of Public Opinion is, I'll have this memorised, don't worry, 0491 65 68 60. 0491 65 68 60. It's a good number. And apparently Tony Denton got that at random, which was very clever. Very, very clever. Yes, so that's where we are, coming up on Friday. And if you want to have a look at anything that we're doing here in the garage, Facebook or the podcast, the best way of doing it is through just going to or dialing up, I'm not sure what the expression should be, jeremycordeaux.com. jeremycordeaux.com. And it's all there. All there. Let's see what we can come up with on Friday. Live streaming this program, but we'll be podcasting on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, but live streaming on Friday. Now, we discussed it at the time. It annoyed many people. I'm talking about the ABC's coverage of the royal coronation, King Charles and Queen Camilla. It was rude, it was insulting, disgraceful, in fact. The Monarchist League collected thousands of signatures from people who felt the same. Anyway, the chairman, Ita Buttrose, finally got around to responding. She stopped well short of apologising for what had gone to air. I see now confirmed today, actually yesterday, by the ABC that Stan Grant would no longer be hosting Q&A, but would remain an important part of the ABC family. Well, I don't know what that's all about. I just know his behaviour was not acceptable. I don't know what's wrong with the ABC. I think it is, as Jonathan Shire, who was the managing director, appointed by, I think, John Howard, to do something about the ABC. As he left in tears, he said, memorably, "The animals have taken over the zoo." The only thing is that, in my experience, animals are quite sensible. Quite sensible. The war in Sudan, I don't expect you to follow all this African nonsense because there's so much of it, but the war in Sudan is 100 days old this week. It's a terrible war. Not that any war is good, but this is a bad one, inflicting shocking damage and suffering on the civilian population. Two factions in the armed forces going at each other for no other reason other than religion. It's ethnic cleansing. I don't know how else you describe it. 3 million people displaced. Thousands and thousands killed. Like all these tin pot places in Africa, they find it almost impossible to live in peace. Yet, where is the United Nations? If ever there was a case for them to step in, this is it. This is going to be another Rwanda, another Somalia. Oh, and there are dozens of others. And speaking of the United Nations, on the weekend, Putin destroyed a UNESCO-listed culturally important site in Ukraine. And not a word from the UN. UNESCO, of course, is part of the UN. Oh, well, what can you say? Russia is part of the Security Council with the right of veto. What could you do? What an impudent bunch of idiots. Why do we pay them? Why do we pay them almost $100 million a year to belong? There is no justification for their existence. Their purpose is, as it was with the League of Nations before them, it was to prevent war and civilian suffering. Count up the number of wars that there have been. Almost continuous war since 1945. The UN is nothing more than a rort, a monumental waste of money. I don't know what we do about it, but we should not go on supporting it. But of course this government, no, they're in there a million miles an hour. Can we get the ministers of the South Australian government, including the Premier, to stop wearing Aboriginal badges on their lapel, signifying some sort of affinity with a tiny part of our population, 1% of the population? Nationally, Aboriginals are 3%, but in South Australia it's 1%. I feel somehow they represent or want to represent Aboriginal South Australia more than the general population. Now the only reason I say this, I mean, they can, as individuals, do what they like. They can have a secret passion, which somehow collectively applies to all the ministers, I don't know. But the truth is, the Aboriginal population of South Australia at 1%, 1%, ladies and gentlemen. So for our ministers, our government, our politicians to identify more with 1% instead of the 99% seems to me to be bizarre. Just regard Aboriginal Australians like all Australians. We are all one people. Come on! Stop the divisiveness. A survey of Australians shows that at least 60% of us think immigration should stop. I know, Pete, you've got firm views on that.
Absolutely. Shut the gate. We're full.
60%. Yeah. How much of that was influenced by our housing problem? I don't know. It could be a multiple of things that's influencing people's thinking, but logic says we have got too many people looking for a place to live at the moment. And we have 400,000 people predicted to arrive in Australia in the next year. And really, we have nowhere for them to go, nowhere for them to live. On one hand, business says, we need workers. Well, if that's true, we have about the same number of people out of work as we have opportunities for work. Surely we can get those two groups together and we solve the problem for everyone. Now, look, don't get me wrong, immigration is good. It's been for years good for Australia. We have benefited enormously from immigration. But we have to have a policy. We have to have a plan. And most importantly, people have to have jobs. And they have to have a place to live. One thing is sure. The more people we have looking for accommodation, the more expensive that accommodation is going to be for everyone. And if the authorities can't see that, we need a new government. I was most heartened to hear that story about Coles Myer. It was Coles more than Myer, but Coles having a gathering of their senior staff. Collectively, all the people in the room added up to about 9,000 years of service. Some had done 20 years, others 30, some 45, some 1, I think, or 250. 1,500 years of service. It was a great gesture of respect for people who had worked for Coles and helped them to build a great and successful company. And they were simply saying thank you. And I think that's wonderful. All too often, long service and good service is ignored by these big companies. That goes for the workers, the executives, the front line, the back line. Their greatest resource, every company, I know it from personal experience, every company, the greatest resource any of us has is our people. I see the Labour government probably at the behest of the trade union movement. I don't know, but I suspect because the trade union movement own the government, they own the Labour Party. They've decided to inflict their ideology on the casual workforce of Australia. I suggest these people are self-employed. They are contractors, proudly contractors. People who possibly don't want a full-time job. They want part-time. One of the things we should work for always in a free society is choice. Personal choice. If I choose to go on staff, if it is offered, well, it's up to me. But if I want to be a contractor, a casual, that's my business. And if the boss agrees, that's fine. I don't care what the trade union movement says. Maybe I like the extra 25% I get as a casual. Slowly, these people in Canberra are taking away our individual freedoms. If we allow this to happen, we deserve it. Don't forget that employers like a casual workforce too. A casual employee saves the employer all those on costs, which are a disincentive to employ. No leave loading, sick leave, workers' compensation, holiday pay, overtime. And apart from that, it's a great way to piss off the unions. And you wouldn't have people wanting to be casuals in the numbers that we have if it wasn't attractive to both employee and employer. Is it any wonder casual work contracts are popular? You know, you can do what you like as a government to make something illegal, but you can't make it unpopular. This country, I'm quite sure, ladies and gentlemen, is going to wake up. The story that has emerged about the Gove Peninsula, you may have seen. The enormous wealth that Australia possesses and produces with the help of our wonderful workers. All Australians, black and white. It is indeed the commonwealth of the fabulously wealthy north of Australia. The huge bauxite deal and massive deposits of iron ore, the royalties deal, which was signed by the Aboriginal elders and Julia Gillard just a few years ago, a good deal for everyone. It guaranteed the Aboriginal people, and not very many, a significant number, but you know, we're not talking very many people, but it guaranteed royalties of about $700 million. Well, all good things come to an end. The mining companies have announced that the deposits have run out, reached the end of their commercial or economic life. The mines will close and the end will come to the royalties. What have the Aboriginals done with the $700 million they've earned in just a few short years? What good has it done? Who got the money? There seems to be very little to show for the money. I saw one elder the other night saying on television, "I don't want my people to go back on the dole." Look, I'm sorry, sir. They never got off the dole. But what happened to the money? Does anyone know? Does anyone care? It is a not so small microcosm of a much larger problem. What we need, the Aboriginal people in particular, is a forensic accountant to discover where all this money goes. I talk a lot about the $35 billion that goes to Aboriginal people. But, you know, I tend to skate over the royalties because I'm not really ever sure exactly how much money's involved. But clearly, a lot. I'll leave you with this one, a well-being budget. Pete, do you know what a well-being budget is?
Never heard of it.
No. A well-being budget. I don't know, well-being budget. We'd all like to be well-being. A well-being budget. I wish the lefties would just stop with all this nonsense. A well-being budget. What they've got to do, talking about budgets, it's simple, you know, no distractions. Just learn to live within your budget. That's all. Everything else is just froth and bubble, smoke and mirrors, trendy nonsense. Most of the figures that appeared when Jim Chalmers released his well-being budget, God knows why he did it, when all the figures that he was rattling off were truly out of date. So what was it all about? What was it all about? I don't know. Can I leave you with some dates? And I'll remind you of the number. It's not that I'm frightened that none of you will ring me on Friday. I'm not even sure how we're going to do that. I suspect the best thing is for you to message me with your phone number and we'll call you out. Because we don't have a switchboard. You know, it's kind of like, you know...
flying by the seat of our pants.
Seat of the pants stuff. But at least we've got a radio station that isn't frightened of saying things that need to be said and will allow you the privilege of the same thing. You say what you think. You know? The number 0491 65 68 60. Friday, and we anticipate between 9 o'clock and 12. I better get an early night. I'm not used to getting up to do a radio program. Anyway, I'll leave you with some birthdays, some interesting things, events. The $200 commemorative gold coin struck to mark the 12th, I think it was, Commonwealth Games in Brisbane. X11. What's X11? That's 12, yeah. I would have thought we'd have more Commonwealth Games back in 1982 than 12. Anyway, be that as it may. Carl Jung, he was born in Switzerland, the psychologist, sexologist, 1875. Blake Edwards was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. 24 hours to Tulsa. 24 hours, Tulsa. 24 hours, Tulsa. Gene Pitney, wasn't it? Yeah, good song. He's the producer and the husband of Julie Andrews. Yeah. Mary Jo Kopechne, now there's a name. That was 1940. Mary Jo Kopechne was born in Pennsylvania, presumably died shortly after midnight on July the 18th, 1968, when Senator Edward Kennedy drove off the narrow wooden bridge on Chappaquiddick Island, Martha's Vineyard, off Massachusetts. It was a sort of a tidal pond. She was a passenger in the car. 28-year-old Washington secretary and political worker had worked for Senator Robert F. Kennedy during his campaign for presidential nomination. And it certainly set Edward Kennedy back a long way. But they've all gone to God. Anyway, that was 1940. Baseballer Babe Ruth makes his last public appearance at the premiere of the New York presentation of his autobiographical movie called The Babe Ruth Story in 1948. Did Babe Ruth... No, Babe Ruth didn't marry Marilyn Monroe, did he?
I've got in the back of my mind that he...
But there was a footballer. No, there was a footballer or a baseballer. She married someone.
DiMaggio.
Joe DiMaggio, that was the one. Yeah. George Gallup has died, 82. That was back in 1984. Possible heart attack. Died in his beautiful home in Switzerland. Founder of the Gallup poll, George Gallup. That's an interesting one. Ed Guerin died, 77 years of age, in a psychiatric institute in Madison, Wisconsin. The farmer who was hospitalized in 1957 for the grisly slayings on which the movie Psycho was presumably based. 1884. Liberia becomes the first African colony to secure independence in 1847. Wow, 1847. Still a basket case. Queen Elizabeth II creates her eldest son Charles, Prince of Wales, in 1958. Bobby Hebb, musician who was born in Tennessee in 1941. A severe earthquake hits Yugoslavia. 1,100 people killed in 1963. Apollo 15 is launched. David Scott, James Irwin, and Alfred Worden on board. Scott and Irwin made the fourth moon landing, but the Apollo 15 took off on this day in 1971. George Bernard Shaw was born in Ireland in 1856. You like cricket, don't you, Pete?
Yes.
The first recorded women's cricket match took place at Gosden Common near Guildford in Surrey. The ladies 11 beat the 11 ladies from Branbury. And you know, somebody told me once that women, the date was remarkably early too, 1745. 1745. Somebody told me that the reason when they're playing cricket they bowl overarm was that as the women were so prominent playing cricket in the early days, they couldn't play it that way, underarm, because of their skirt. I don't know if that's true or not. Pete, being an aficionado, you should know.
I don't.
Okay. We'll leave it there. We'll tag this, as we will, up until the end of the week, I think, with these bits and pieces that you've sent me about The Voice, because I value your contribution and your care and your caring about the particular subject. Thank you very much for viewing the Court of Public Opinion. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. We'll see you tomorrow. Believe in yourself. Pete and I will be back. Bye for now.